Our guest today, Dwayne Siekman from the Ohio Corn and Wheat Growers. He's the executive director there. And Dwayne, I'm sure for you it's deja vu all over again as the food versus fuel debate begins to gain some traction just as it did back in '08. Hearing a lot of the same arguments linking ethanol production to the price of food. Among the reasons for the resurgence of the conversation, a lower yielding crop in '09, a record production year for biofuels. What are some of the different ideas that you're hearing from the opposition this time around?
I think there's a lot of things that have been thrown out on the internet, thrown out on news shows, and I think one of the things that over the last couple of weeks that we saw is that there were a number of folks that were tying the revolution in Egypt to ethanol and corn, saying that was really the catalyst for those people to overthrow their government because they were hungry, because ethanol production has caused more corn production, which has taken wheat acres out around the world. And so that was one of the more interesting things that came about over the last couple of weeks. And, as we've seen in this country, wheat acres have been declining for 30 years. They're actually up in Ohio this year. Nothing to do with ethanol production. It was just strictly profitability and introduction of new traits for corn. Even beans that you could actually plant those crops in the typical wheat growing regions in the country. Top that off, you had the drought in Russia, the ban on exports. You had the floods in Australia. You had South American droughts and floods. And so worldwide production has been hampered by those weather-related events, some catastrophic in nature.
There are some changes in your view this time around as well on the other side of the coin over the last 3 years. In fact, the last couple of days, some technological advancement has been approved by USDA in terms of corn production for ethanol.
Absolutely. It's the product that Syngenta's put together, a corn amylase that is dedicated just for ethanol production, which is a more efficient corn for ethanol production. It requires less energy, less water, better yields. And so I think as time goes on and you see the traits coming to the marketplace, you're going to see, the efficiencies of not only ethanol production, but of feeding corn is going to change the landscape. And I'm not saying it's going to create more acres of corn or take away from other markets. They're going to be niche markets that are going to be directly consumed by the end user of choice, and most likely probably through direct contracts from the end user to the individual farmer. And I think that the big point that we're trying to make, and everybody uses percentages of how much corn is going to ethanol production, and what they fail to realize is a simple third-grade math. As supply goes up and demand for exports is constant, the percentages of total use is going to go down. So that's the danger of using percentages of how much corn is going to ethanol, to livestock, to exports. Because if you really look at the numbers, look at the amount of DDGs that are displacing corn, you're not seeing a difference in the amount of corn or corn equivalents going to livestock and exports that we saw 10 years ago. So we're not taking corn away from other markets to feed the ethanol industry. We're simply using the excess corn.
A lot of this message, as you know, Dwayne, getting to the consumer, and of course, if food prices continue to rise, they'll be the voice that gets heard. So you want to get this message out to them. But another voice you have to answer to is that of livestock producers. Is it a bit more of a thin line to walk since they too are in the industry of agriculture?
Our organization is looking at our policy, and livestock still is the number one market for total consumption of corn and distillers' grains. So we want to make sure that there's not an unfair playing field, and I think looking at the federal budget and issues along those lines, we're taking a hard look about the policies, the infrastructure needs of both livestock, both ethanol, exports, and really going back and really looking at what our true beliefs are. I think the livestock markets are benefiting from strong prices as well. A lot of that was because of herd supply, fixing the supply-demand scenario there. But we have to keep in mind that, the market ultimately does its job. And the market, if corn gets too high, no one's going to buy corn. It's traditionally been the case. So I think it's going to play out in the end. The U.S. farmer is the most efficient in the world, and the need for acres, the need for good yields, and hopefully the weather cooperates. That we can get a supply that doesn't have that end use number so low, but also we can't go back to the days of $1.52 corn. We've always said there's no shortage of corn, there's just a shortage of $2 corn, because that doesn't work in the grain farmer scenario either.
I know the questions are being thrown your way from environmentalists, from livestock producers, from consumers, and I know that, Dwayne, there are some resources out there consumers and everyone else can check out.
Absolutely. You can go to our website, ohiocornandwheat.org, and go to our national organization, ncga.com. You have various ethanol organizations, and the one thing that everybody needs to be mindful of is not to overreact. And there's a lot of rhetoric on blogs. There's a lot of rhetoric in the mainstream media. And if you really just take a big, broad look and understand the ins and outs of the marketplace of what ethanol means to livestock and what the corn farmer is doing in this country, it gives you a little different perspective on what the whole impact that corn and ethanol have on food prices.
The Executive Director of the Ohio Corn and Wheat Growers, Dwayne Siekman, our guest today on the Ohio AgNet.